God is great, God is good. Let us thank Him for this food. Amen. Thank you for joining me here today, everyone. My name is Elizabeth, and Miss Re-Ritten Vintage Rescue has asked me to talk to you about the Pilgrims and the first Thanksgiving. I have been here in Maryland for a very short time, several months, and it's been very, very hard. I've seen a lot of death. I've seen a lot of suffering. But now we have so much to be thankful for. I thought we should start at the very beginning. Some people feel or believe that the Pilgrims were the first people here in the United States, and that is not true. Hundreds of years before we even came to the United States, there were traders, there were slavers, there were merchants, there were people looking for places to live. There were the French, there were the Dutch, there were the Spanish. Many people came to the United States for land, for hunting, for riches. I am a pilgrim. I'm also known as a brownie. And we left the Church of England. We fled the Church of England. And for many years, we lived in Holland. There in Holland, they were as good to us as they would be to any other person who was not of their nationality. However, we began to be afraid that we would lose our language and our faith and our customs. So we needed somewhere else to go. We could not return back to England. We would be killed. We refused to follow the English Church's doctrines. They're Catholic. We did not believe in praying to idols. We did not believe in mixing politics and religion. We want a pure faith. We want to live very purely. And nothing is true but the Bible. The Bible is the only thing in life that's infallible. And so we are trying to find a place where we can establish our own home and our own way of life. In 1585, many Englishmen went to Roanoke, Virginia, to begin a colony there. However, because of the lack of supplies and the harsh conditions and sickness, they weren't able to make a go of it. Then again, in 1607, Englishmen again, who were members of the Virginia Company, they had settled into a pact with this company saying, we will hunt, we will fish, we will find goods, we will find riches, and we will send those back to you, and we will take a small share of those and establish a colony here. However, that was in Jamestown, Virginia, and they were not able to make a very good start of that either. In 1620, when we, the Pilgrims, decided to try to find a place for us to settle, we started off on a boat called the Speedwell. Many of us paid our fare to go on the Speedwell. There were about 110 of us. However, the Speedwell, it was taking on water. We were afraid we would not be able to live. We were going to perish. So no sooner than we took off, we had to turn around and come back. Well, the men, they changed the mast, the large mast on the ship, and they made some repairs to the speedwell. So we tried yet again. We tried yet again to come somewhere and find a place to live. However, the mast broke not long after we left, and so we had to return again. It was at that time that the Mayflower, which had already made 2 trips to the United States, became available. So we paid our passage to take the trip on the Mayflower. It wasn't only pilgrims that were on that ship. There were also traders and furriers and people of unseemly character and sailors and people wanting to find their riches who had also paid for passage. And the Mayflower was really no better than the Speedwell. However, we were able to make it. It did not take on water, but there was so much sickness, so much hunger. Many people became sick with scurvy, which is a food disease. And some of the sailors, we would beg. The pilgrims would beg for help, would beg for aid, and they were told, "No, you're nothing to us. You mean nothing to us. No, we will not help." Many of them said that if someone was dying, they should be thrown overboard. It was a harrowing trip, and it took months and months. When we finally landed, we landed very, very far off course, and we were very afraid. So there became a lot of fighting amongst the men. Some of the men who were not pilgrims, they were wanting to go ashore and to start looking for riches and so they could have their own fortunes that they would not have to send back to England. Our group, however, we knew that nobody could make it without the other. We all needed each other. And so we were fearful. And there was a lot of infighting. So the men finally sat down and they came up with an agreement that was called the Mayflower Compact. And that was the basis of the first Declaration of Independence. We would work together. We would work for one cause. No person was better than the other person. We would share. We would not harm each other. And we would live in good Christian faith. However, we stayed on the ship, the women, the children, and a few of the men went ashore. When they did, they were attacked by many arrows coming from all different directions, and they came back to the ship as fast as they left. Not long after that, they tried it again, and they were attacked again, this time by more. They counted at least 30 to 35 native arrows. They thought they were going to die. We had to leave. We had to leave. They were not welcoming. So the next day we set off further north, as far as we could make it. The waters once again were very, very rough. And when we finally found a place that we could stop, we had to stop. There was so much sickness on the ship. Many of our people were not going to make it. We had to find a place to light soon. The leader of the Pilgrims was named William Bradford, and he is your best primary resource if you're wanting to learn more about myself and other pilgrims who came here to the United States and landed in Plymouth, Massachusetts. His words are a living document of what really happened. And what he said upon our arrival was they had now no friends to welcome them, nor inns to entertain or refresh their weather-beaten bodies, no houses, no much less town to repair to, and for the season it was winter. And they that know the winters of that country know them to be sharp and violent, and subject to cruel and fierce storms, dangerous to travel to known places, much more to search an unknown coast. Besides, what could they see but hideous and desolate wilderness, full of wild beasts and men? Thing we noticed when we came to Plymouth was there had been an Indian village there, but it was very deserted. In fact, it was awful. There had been a sickness or plague there. Many of the natives were even still dead in their beds. Skeletons everywhere. We found out later that many people who had come over to fish or to find their fortunes, or slavers, they didn't believe back then in the day to bathe. Even King Louis from France had only bathed 3 times in his life. And so when they came here to the United States, they had much bacteria on their bodies that the natives could not fight off. And so they called that the Great Dying. The Great Dying. And many of them died from the bacteria that was on the skin of the Europeans who came over. It was a terrible scene. But we found corn. We found corn seeds inside the huts. We found tools. We found things that we could use. So we started right away. The very first thing we built during that cold first winter was a hospital for the sick and the elderly and the children as they became sick. At night, we would hear Indians wandering around outside. So they would sneak up and they would steal their tools back, or they would steal our supplies. But they never harmed us or never tried to harm us, so we caused them no harm either. The men stayed very busy during those cold months building homes for everyone to the best of their ability. And we made those homes very, very close together so we could protect each other from harm. But we were starving. We had nothing to eat. All of our supplies were almost gone. We didn't know if we would make it. And by the time the ground began to thaw, there were only about 50 of us left. William Bradford described it as, all this while Indians came stalking and skulking about them, and would sometimes show themselves aloof. But when any approached them, they would run away. But that which was most sad and lamentable was that in 2 or 3 months' time, half of the company had died, especially in January and February, in the depth of winter, and wanting houses and other comforts, being infected with scurvy and other diseases. Of that, scarcely 50 remain. A very tall native came walking into our camp. Well, all the men grabbed their muskets to protect us. But the native held up his hand and began to speak. And he could speak English. It was choppy. It was hard to understand, but he spoke our language. And he said his name was Samoset. Samoset explained that many times people would come to fish, to trap, to hunt. And he became friends with many of them, and he helped them. And because of that, they helped him. And they benefited from being friends with each other. But Samoset's tribe was no longer. Samoset also told us there was another Indian who could talk better than him, and his name was Squanto. And he would bring Squantum back to us. And so, within a few days, Samoset and Squantum came. We called Squantum Squanto. He told us that he had been stolen as a slave and taken to England and away from his tribe and away from his family and forced to work. And that's where he learned to speak the English language. He spoke it very well. Somehow he made his way back to his home, but when he got back, which is where we were, everyone was dead from sickness. After meeting Squanto and Samoset, they were very welcome in our camp. They taught us so much. They began to teach us how to plant our corn correctly and how to grow other things with that corn to benefit, such as squash and beans, and how to do it so that they relied on each other to grow. Actually, we would have died had it not been for Squanto and Samoset. And within several days of them visiting for the first time, they brought with them a great chief. The chief was from the Wampanoag tribe. There were many, many members of that tribe, and they had taken in Samoset and Squanto. Within days of meeting Squanto and Samoset, Chief Massasoit came. He was the great Indian chief of the Wampanoag tribe. There were many of them, and we were very afraid. But he came in peace, and he liked beer. So many of the men gave him beer to drink, and he was very happy. And he told us that they would help us. They would help us. They felt bad for us, but we in turn would need to help them. There were many other tribes, he explained to us, that would not be as friendly as his tribe. They would want to cause us great harm. They would also want to cause his tribe great harm. And they did not have the muskets that we did, or some of the other lines of defense that we had brought with us. So if we would help them protect themselves from invading tribes, they would help us survive. They would help us build places where we could live and stay, and they would help us grow our food. For 50 years, we were friends. The very first Thanksgiving was the fall after we had arrived. We had a mighty harvest thanks to the natives. And so we invited them all to come join us for a Thanksgiving feast. Our men went out and shot many fowl, many turkeys, many quail, many ducks. Their men went out and killed many deer. Massasoit brought 90 of his braves with him to our dinner. And for 3 days we sang songs, we talked with our friends, we ate, we played games, the men competed in sports. It was a wonderful, wonderful 3 days of Thanksgiving that we had survived such a harrowing trip. Some people get the Pilgrims mixed with the Puritans. The Puritans were further north than we were. They were not as friendly with the natives as the Pilgrims were. We wanted to live in peace. It wasn't until many more Europeans came over and also landed in Plymouth, Massachusetts, that there began to be a problem with the natives. As the Europeans began to see the treasure that was tobacco and needed more land to grow that tobacco. And so there became problems. But not with us, and not with Massasoit, and not with the Wampanoag tribes, not with his men or his women, and not with our men. We were friends for many, many years. And that's the thing to remember about Thanksgiving, is that it's a fine, fine example of how two very, very different races of people with different beliefs, different ideas, different goals, different backgrounds will be able to put all of that aside for peace. Thanksgiving is a day of thanks and a day of peace.